Hi, it's Andy and Alan, and we're talking Sunday morning about a return to healing. And today we're going to talk probably about the most important topic in terms of health, not the healthcare system, but health. And that is what you do to achieve health. And I was talking to a group of people yesterday. It was about diabetes and issues of we call our endocrine or hormonal system and how sophisticated that system is in keeping us healthy until we destroy it. And it's really interesting, Alan, that the diabetes epidemic, call it what you want, we talk a lot about how it's a dual epidemic. Half of it is because we changed the definition of diabetes. So we made it more inclusive. We lowered the numbers of sugar that counts. So now like everyone's a diabetic or pre-diabetic, but also because the incidence of diabetes increased as when doctors started talking about low fat diets uh and all these medicines. We started getting to be a little more overweight, doing less for ourselves, relying more on doctors, and it's kind of ironic that we spend tens of $billions on both weight loss and diabetes drugs that we know diabetes is fixable. Right? If you just have a good lifestyle. I mean, adult diabetes, I want to distinguish that because it's really a disease where our insulin doesn't work. And our insulin doesn't work when we inflame our body by mistreating it. And if we treat our body well, our insulin works better. And that's the way all our systems work in our body. And even our immune system works better when we treat our body well, when we eat well, and all across the world. People in societies that see fewer doctors get fewer tests. My friend and I joked yesterday, we were looking up all these old artists and composers from like the 15 and 1600s. They were living to their mid 80s. I mean, our founding fathers' average lifespan was about 85. And we were joking that how'd they do it? They weren't on statins. I mean, what's the chance that they did it without a stent? It doesn't make any sense. So it's because everyone ate grass-fed beef. Everyone it was free of pesticides. People were walking all over the place back then because that's what you had to do, and we're not doing that anymore, and we're getting
And
sicker.
and one of the keys to that, Andy, you brought it up, especially artists and musicians. What are the people? They love their lives. Like they thrive on their artwork, they thrive on their music. They're not taking the subway to work every day and, having family feuds. These people were happy, and that is a key to longevity. Our world is, I shouldn't say our world, our country is screwed up in healthcare. We know it. We have one of the least efficient, least effective healthcares in the world. We live, our longevity in this country is about it's always between like 37, 38, and 40 in the world. And we have the most advanced medical system. If you get shot, if you're having a heart attack or a stroke, we do really good at that. We do good at acute medicine. We do really poorly at prevention because we don't invest anything in it. And we now know, like the evidence clearly shows that the medical industrial complex, what we do, only affects about 20% or so of our longevity. That, the key factors actually to determining health and longevity is a combination of the genetics you're born with and modifiable lifestyle factors like diet and exercise and looking at your cardiac arrest, the environmental exposure you have, your friends and your family and things like that, and very little to do with statins and healthcare. It's very unfortunate, and we haven't gotten that word out, that what is important is a healthy lifestyle and, addressing some of the health related social needs that we see in the underserved communities that, I live my life in.
Yeah, and it is of that 20%, like you say, that the medical system can impact. Almost all of that is the stuff you talked about. You get in a car accident, you get shot, you get your appendix ruptures. I think I saw somewhere that it's 7% of our health determinant is based on the medical system's ability to control chronic illness. And by that, almost all of it is, we want to make sure your blood pressure is not 250. We want to control your sugar to some extent, and if you get sick, obviously we give you antibiotics if you need them. The antibiotics, the advent of antibiotics, plus the advent of a system where we don't drink the water we just pooped in, just some kind of sanitation system. Those two alone probably contributed more to our lifestyle increase than anything else. But Alan, since the age of statins and stents, which is what I call it, life expectancy has gone down. To look at that piece of reality, we're actually living shorter as we're doing all this stuff. Because, and this is my own theory, I think the more we rely on the medical system to fix us, and we see this with these diet shots, the Wegovy and Ozempic, the more we rely on someone giving us a pill or a shot to fix us, the less we focus on our own ability to fix ourselves. Whereas in most of the rest of the world, Europe has a sophisticated system too, but they restrict its use to some extent, and they live 7 years longer on average than we do. Why? Because they are focused more on their lifestyle and always have been. We are giving our life over to the doctors and to the pharmaceutical companies and telling them to fix us. And I think that just attitude itself has pushed us in the wrong direction in terms of what we really need to do.
Right. And you're right. I'll come back to some of the comments you said. The 7%, I read the same thing. The other 23% or the other 13%, excuse me, is that acute care that we give, when you have an appendicitis or whatever it may be. Right. And the two things that were always felt to make us live longer was the sanitation of water and, the advent of bacteria and antibiotics and things like that. And we knew early on antibiotics made a tremendous difference. And we know now that there's so much resistance out there from overuse that now we probably hurt ourselves more with the antibiotics that we give people. And you're right as well. Our longevity is going down. And when you look at the places where longevity is going up, it's about their healthy lifestyle. It's about their diet. It's about, hard work. It's about living with families and having conversations and lack of loneliness. Loneliness alone is shown to be a huge cause of death. And you're right as well. You're always right, but I take that back. And even if you're not right, I'll say you're right because, the medical societies and medical boards will argue with you, but you end up being right as well. We could go back with many of those things. But, when you look at what drugs have done, we talked about it on one of our Zooms a few weeks ago. What has become one of the largest causes of death or the number one cause of death in our senior citizens in this country is falls. And that's not happening in the rest of the world. So why are people falling in the United States and they're not falling in the rest of the world? We're giving them too many drugs. We're giving them drugs that cause osteoporosis, which lead to broken hips. We're giving them benzos that are knocking them out. We're lowering their blood pressure too much. We're lowering their blood sugar too much. And people are falling and breaking their hips. We're an overdrug country. The rest of the world doesn't do it, and they live longer because of it, because they're not falling. And that's another key factor. That's, when the article came out, it got good buzz. I even saw it on the local news about the fall thing. And then it went away, and we're probably prescribing more drugs since that article came out.
Well, we're trying. How about that new pill that prevents falls? That's good. And I'm just joking. But there is in the works a
We
pill
know
that is
there's a
supposed.
drug for that.
There is a drug in the works that's supposed to mimic exercise. So, you don't have to exercise. I said in my talk yesterday, you can sit in a chair, put on your virtual reality, take a shot for your weight loss, take a shot for your exercise, take a bunch of pills for your statins and all this stuff, and that'll be your life. You'll be living in that's kind of like the movie Wall-E that came out a long time ago. That's what our society had reverted to. But yeah, they don't have dementia in in these other places either to the extent that we do. We just know all these chronic illnesses that we are contending with are not fixed by medicines. It's a fight I get into with neurologists all the time. Cardiologists are not the only ones who have hung up on me when I talk to them, neurologists too, and it's because I've never seen a neurologist in my town, or even in the big universities in Baltimore that I've dealt with, talk about lifestyle. It's kind of wild. They just prescribe medicines that we know don't work. And what do these medicines do? There was a person I saw that is on a weight loss drug and said, God, thank God for this because it was just so exhausting constantly thinking about what to eat. Um, Exhausting. I mean, that's really
It's
that should be second nature to us that we should be eating the right way. That should be what we do. We are a temple. I remember seeing this old movie, this old Neil Simon movie, and Richard Dreyfuss preaching that our body is a temple and we can't abuse it. We have to take care of it. But we don't look at it that way anymore. We
we
believe
don't.
our body is
And
is a
sometimes we don't
pincushion
think
for
that way.
doctors.
So
That's what it is.
I'm not thinking in a good way. I got my COVID brain on. I totally forgot. In about 2 weeks, I'm participating in a day-long conference. I would send it to you, Andy, but I'll give you the link if you want to see me
Yeah.
talk. But it's a day-long conference. I believe the title is Healthy Aging, the Key to Longevity in Life. And it's a
Wow.
it's a
Perfect.
one-day conference. I'm giving a talk on integrative approaches to longevity, and it's all based on evidence, and it's about the evidence behind it, and it's really interesting. Every talk is something about lifestyle medicine. Every talk is about socialization, mental health, um, diet, exercise. Because there's no evidence, there's no medical evidence about things like blood pressure and sugar. All the evidence is truly about, changes in lifestyle and socialization. And, we know with Alzheimer's, like, bring it up in doctors, like the incidence of Alzheimer's in a working physician is zero, okay? Or a working attorney, or anyone, who works really hard, like an accountant, people who use numbers and use their mind a lot. These people who work in their 70s and 80s and more don't get Alzheimer's disease. Okay, why? Because, I always say to my patients, you got to exercise your mind or it's going to go dead. We sit looking, at our phones all day, like we're like this all day, or what people are looking at a TV. People think looking at a TV is like utilizing your mind. It's people don't do anything to stimulate their brains. I have my patients that, they retire and I say, what's your plan? What's your purpose in life? Oh, I'm going to sit on the couch. I worked really hard for my life. And I said, you're going to die really soon from sitting on the couch. You're going to get fat, you're going to get out of shape, and you're going to have a heart attack or a stroke, or you will get dementia because you're not doing anything.
And yeah, but a lot of these people now believe as long as their cholesterol is normal and their prediabetes is fixed and they're on these drugs, these statins and you could fix the weight now and you can if you start getting memory loss, hell, the neurologist got drugs for you for that too, that this reliance on other people to do for them. And we've all seen this. I someone I saw was giving someone in my family gives seminars in a community center to people who are retired or at least mostly retired because it's really hard when you're retired to keep active, keep purpose, keep your brain going, keep your social skills up. It's hard to do it, and we all want to retire, but we shouldn't retire our brains when that happens. It's really important. And yeah, they don't do that. You look at, so we talked briefly about blue zones, Alan, before we started this. And we don't want to overstate the importance of the blue zones, but it's a group of countries slash cities where people live really long and really healthy and don't get dementia and barely get diabetes or heart attacks. But if you take genetically blue zone people and put them in our country, or put people from any of these countries where they live a lot longer than us and put them in our country, they start living as long as we do, which is tells you how much of this is genetics does play a role. Um, but how much of this is in our hands? What our lifestyle is.
Sure.
Not taking shots. That's
And I always remember this. There is one blue zone in the United States, and that's in
right.
Loma Linda, California. And the key to their longevity, I believe, I haven't read about it that much, is that they are Seventh-day Adventists, and
Hmm.
they kind of commune together and eat together and work the land together and things like that. And that's what is common about the blue zones when you read about them. And I've read extensively just to see what the difference is. But the big things is about, purpose in life and socialization and, eating healthy, not eating processed foods. We know that is by far and away the worst thing that you could do. And I don't tell people not to eat anything that's natural. And that includes beef and eggs and stuff. They go back and forth with the eggs. Eggs are healthy. Eggs are going to kill you. Eggs, well, it depends on how the eggs are raised, but if it's a natural egg that's grass-fed or, whatever, you do well. And it's the same thing with a cow. But if they're getting antibiotics and hormones and chemicals, it will kill you. So we know that about everything. And you're right. I think you started off saying that, our founding fathers ate, good beef. They loved a good piece of meat. So,
Everyone did, right? All beef was grass fed back in the day. All eggs were pasture raised. We're paying a lot of money for stuff that was just normal. And the beef we have now, not only are the cows in some kind of pen not moving around doing anything, but they are getting these shots of hormones and antibiotics. And you had mentioned we antibiotics now are overused. We are using too many antibiotics. Doctors prescribe antibiotics to such excess that so many people are on it. And despite that, Alan, 97% of antibiotics prescribed in this country are prescribed to animals that we're
yep.
going to eat. And that just shows you how, because we give a lot of antibiotics to people, that shows you how many antibiotics these animals are getting that we are eating, and hormones and others. And what they eat is garbage, pesticide laden, pellets. So, yeah, the food is killing us in our country. The food industry is really bad, and they are number one advertisers. Drug companies are number two advertisers. They work in cahoots
Right.
because basically bad food means more drugs. So that
And
it's a wonderful, profitable way to deal with situation, but it's not good for your health. It's not the way you live longer. Every longevity book I've read, every longevity talk I've been to, they don't talk about stents and statins and all that kind of stuff. As Alan said, they talk only about lifestyle. The only difference might be they add a few supplements, but it's only because our diet's deficient in certain things. But it's lifestyle, 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 and yet it's rare you go to a doctor's office where that's their focus.
yep.
Almost unheard of with a specialist. Unheard of.
The other thing about the blue zones, and it's out, and it. I learned that from my friend who went to medical school in Italy. Uh, uh, in Italy, in the cafeteria, I don't know if it's still there, but it used to be, you could have a glass of wine with breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And the key was, red wine. And the key was, no other alcohol actually in those groups. Like they would drink a glass of red wine for breakfast, a glass of red wine for lunch, and one for dinner. And, there's evidence to that high use of red wine in the blue zones. The antibiotic thing is so huge because, we also know, if you're not dying from a fall in this country, you're dying from sepsis. Sepsis is a bloodborne infection, usually caused by pneumonia, urinary tract infections, skin infections, whatever it may be in the elderly. And it has an extremely high mortality rate. Why does it have such a high mortality rate? Because there's so much drug resistance out there. Maybe our next talk should be on the overuse of antibiotics and the drug resistance that's out there, Andy, because it's a major crisis in this country, and we're not coming up with it. There hasn't been the invention of a really good new antibiotic that works in a different way. And there's a fear out there that we're going to die from the bugs from the antibiotics we're given.
Yeah, the bugs we're creating are these super bugs that not only are resistant to everything, but they're also very lethal. And that's why going to the hospital, which we've talked about, is such a dangerous proposition because they breed there. And now they're starting to breed in nursing homes too, because they're using so many antibiotics in nursing homes. But yeah, I think that would be a good next talk. And again, it gets to the point that our immune system is strongest when we are healthiest, when we have less inflammation. So what does that mean? It means eating like we talked about. And we've talked about it many times what a good diet is. It means exercising. The Blue Zone guy I've heard talk so many times, and they always say, well, always the same question. What's the commonality in these blue zones? And as Alan says, it's not genetic. There's one that Seventh-day Adventists, they're all comers, but they're vegetarians and they're moving around all the time and they're working communally, which is what works. Those are the ingredients. But he always says, well, in the blue zone, nobody goes to the gym. Well, what does that mean? It means they're walking around all day. They're moving around all day. When people go to the gym, which is wonderful, I don't want to discourage it, but sometimes they'll go for 20 minutes and that's it. Then they're on the couch the rest of the day. That
That's right.
doesn't count,
They're in
actually.
the couch all day
That's
and they
our
go they
society.
and they go into the cupboard and eat, chips and cookies and stuff, but I worked out today. It's okay. So you actually just came
Exactly.
up with another good talk, Andy. We haven't dived into the depth of the weeds of what is a good diet because people don't understand that. Like there are people that say I cannot eat an egg and I cannot eat beef. So I think it's another
What's wrong
good
with most
talk
of that?
out there.
Yeah.
I think, we just don't get it. We don't get it that the key to longevity is what we eat, how much we exercise, a sense of purpose in life, a sense of family, socializing, and that doesn't mean being on your phone for 14 hours a day, which is what the youth of our country is doing and why we have an obesity epidemic.
And on social media, driving each other crazy by saying their lives are better than everyone else's, and then they
Yeah,
look at everyone else's life and say, "Oh, my life's terrible." Yeah,
just look at
it's
our
complex.
politicians. Look at our politicians. So either, you're a fascist or you're a communist. It's like one or the other.
It's binary. Yeah, we've turned everything into a binary. The middle is gone in terms of this. So, and that's true with medicine. Some people criticize me. They call me, a misinformer. I'm an anti-vax guy, by the way, in some people's minds, because I say, well, and when you're older, I say, well, we're not sure about, the COVID vaccine right now. We know the flu shot's good. You should get that and not get it together. Oh my God, you're an anti-vaxxer? I said, no, there's some nuance here. We got to talk about nuance. And we don't want the vaccines to inflame us by getting too many at once when we're older. I said, we just want to lower inflammation. It's all about that. Everything is about inflammation. And yeah, why don't we do that, Alan? Let's do a deep
Let,
dive
let
into
me let me
diet
save you
next
a trip
time.
to the medical board. You're not an anti-vaxxer, Andy.
I'm
Andy
not an
is
anti-vaxxer.
Andy is not an anti-vaxxer. He
I'm
is
not.
he is a proponent for the appropriate use of vaccines.
Yes.
That's
Which
another topic.
which is the middle road that we should all be on. I said, if anti-vaxxing means I asked questions, we're in a world now. If you question things, I was yelled at in my office the other day because someone had read our book on one of my patients, and we had put in evidence that stents are not helping people when they're put in based on a stress test or a catheterization, even if they find a 90% blockage, the evidence is clear about that. And he had a stent and wants to know that it saved his life. But
He
um,
was having a heart attack, I hope.
he was having an appropriate use of a stent.
Great.
It was unstable angina, which was an appropriate use of a stent. And I explained that to him. I said, but it's not, because he had thought, I'm an anti-stenter. I said, I'm not an anti-stenter. I said, I'm for the appropriate use of stents, which is when you're having an acute event, like a heart attack or what we call unstable angina, which is similar. Then stents are great, but that's like 10% of the stents put in this country. So yeah, the middle is gone. You're either on one extreme or the other. And people have said that to us, Al, and they said, "Well, you guys just reject the entire medical system. You want everyone to go back to just eating and not going to doctors. We're not. We're doctors who see patients. Okay, so that's not what we advocate, but we advocate judicious use of the medical system as a supplement to your own lifestyle changes that are paramount. That should be number one. So yeah, let's talk about diet next time if that
Sure.
is good, especially since it'll be right after Thanksgiving. So that'll make
Perfect.
sense.
Perfect. So
Okay.
so
Well,
eat
have a
healthy
great
on
Thanksgiving.
Thanksgiving, be with your family, go out and take a walk, take care of yourself.
All those good things. Yep.
All
And
right. Have a good one,
a little
everybody.
football is fine. Okay. Take care.